Reporting from Arkham Asylum, this is Gotham Rogues. In this video I count down my 20 favorite Batman stories of all time. Exactly 1 year ago today, on the 6th of July, I uploaded my first video, the top 5 best Riddler stories. It's amazing to think how far this channel has come since then, and the community that we've built up. You are as much responsible for that as I am, because I could have been sitting here making videos all by myself without anyone watching. A YouTube channel really is nothing without its viewers and a community, so I want to thank you all for your contributions. Even those who never write any comments or send me messages, just watching my videos is plenty enough. Anyway, holy shit was this video difficult to make. I've rearranged the order of the entries like a million times and removed and added stories. It's just insanely hard to pick your favorite Batman comics out of all the countless ones that you've read. It's a lot easier when you focus on a specific character, like the villains, which I usually do. For this video, the only requirements I had was for the stories to feature Batman himself in a central role. So for example, while Questions Multiply the Mystery is my favorite Riddler story, it's not going to show up here as it barely features Batman. As usual, I really want to know which your favorite Batman comics are. You don't have to write 20, 10 is enough. Or if you want to, you can take it one step further and write your 50 favorites. I want to see plenty of discussions about the greatest Batman stories ever told down in the comments. Number 20. Threat of the Two-Headed Coin. Published in Batman 258 in 1974, this one features the writing of Bat legend Denny O'Neil and the artwork by underrated Bat artist Irv Novick. In the story, Two-Face is sprung from Arkham by General John Harris, a military man gone rogue. He needs Harvey Dent to pull off a crime on a massive scale, namely to hijack an atom bomb and hold Washington DC hostage. Harvey doesn't like being number 2 though, so he deals with Harris and takes command over the operation himself. It's then up to Batman to stop his old friend turned enemy from annihilating the capital of the United States. How could I not include this one? The second Batman comic I ever read and the first Two-Face comic I read. It's very special to me personally, but besides the massive amounts of nostalgia I feel for it, it's also a pretty damn good story. Two-Face is handled perfectly and is portrayed as both a major threat for Batman to defeat and as a tragic, sympathetic figure. And also, this features the first appearance of Arkham Asylum, so that's pretty neat. Number 19. Batman meets Batmite. The story that introduced Batmite. It was published in Detective Comics 267, released in 1959. The writer was Batman creator Bill Finger and the artist was Sheldon Moldoff. The story is simply put about Batman and Robin's first encounter with that mischievous little imp known as Batmite. He suddenly pops up one day in the Batcave and claims to be the Cape Crusader's biggest fan, expressing wishes to fight crime alongside him. Naturally, Batman says no, so for the rest of the story the imp shows up at the least convenient times, disrupting the dynamic duo's crime busting. A pretty odd pick to put on a list for sure, but what can I say, I just absolutely love Batmite. He's such a fun character that reminds us all of the simpler, more light-hearted side of comic books. As for Batmite stories, you can't really go wrong with this one, the very first one. It's a perfect, goofy, really entertaining and hilarious Silver Age classic that kinda defines that era to me. Number 18. Lovebird. Published in Batman Annual 11 in 1987, this one was written by Max Allan Collins and penciled by the amazing Norm Breyfogle. It's about the Penguin turning over a new leaf, ending his criminal career to marry the love of his life, Davina Partridge, a woman he met through an ornithology magazine. Of course, the grim Dark Knight refuses to buy into Oswald's talk of reform and stays on his tail like a hawk, waiting for the Penguin to slip up and reveal his true sinister agenda. However, there ain't one. This is my favorite Penguin story, and I've already talked about it in my top 5 best Penguin stories video. It's another fun and light-hearted story, just like the Batmite one. However, this one is also very touching and sweet. What makes it so great is that Penguin really is reformed, and isn't just pulling off some scheme. Batman is also really fun as the paranoid skeptic, and I guess you could say he's kinda cast as the antagonist of the story. Number 17. A Bullet for Bullock. Written by Chuck Dixon, penciled by Graham Nolan, and published in Detective Comics 651 in 1992, this is a classic which the TAS episode adapted. Just like on the show, Harvey Bullock finds himself targeted by a mysterious killer who desperately wants the gruff old cop dead. To help him crack the case, Bullock turns to the world's greatest detective, who he also just happens to hate, Batman. I guess I'll just repeat what I said in the 100th video special. I love the relationship between Batman and Bullock. They don't like each other very much, yet here they're forced to work together, and that is very entertaining to see. Just like the episode, the comic also has a very strong film noir vibe, even without the jazz score. Here they mainly achieve that with Bullock's gritty narration and Graham Nolan's wonderful illustrations. Seriously, he's one underrated Bat artist, and this story features his best work. I love the heavy use of shadows and the cinematic angles. Number 16. The Ratcatcher. The two-parter that introduced Otis Flanagan, aka the Ratcatcher. It was published across Detective Comics 585 to 586 in 1988 and featured the writing of Alan Grant and John Wagner and the artwork of Norm Breyfogle. The story is about Batman stumbling across a new insane villain called the Ratcatcher who can control swarms of rats. This deranged individual lives down in the sewers where he's also holding several people prisoners, and it's up to the Dark Knight to venture down into the Ratcatcher's lair and rescue them. I love the classic Alan Grant and Norm Breyfogle Batman run of the late 80s and early 90s. Those comics, alongside a lot of Bronze Age stuff, are among the earliest Batman comics I read, so they kinda shaped my vision of comic book Batman. Of that run, I'd say this is my favorite, although it wasn't an easy pick. It's a very suspenseful action thriller with some horror vibes and a very chilling and insane villain. Plus, I have a fond memory of reading it for the first time one summer at a local festival. Number 15. The Riddle-less Robberies of the Riddler. Another Silver Age classic, it was published in Batman 179 in 1966 and featured the writing of Robert Kanigher and the penciling of Sheldon Moldoff. This one I talked about in my very first video, and now here we are 1 year later and I'm talking about it again. The story is about Riddler being fed up with always losing to Batman and Robin, so he decides to stop leaving riddles before his crimes. As a result, the King of Conundrums is more successful than ever. However, has he really dropped his old habit of leaving clues, or is he still doing it subconsciously, now with very vague riddles? This story was actually pretty ahead of its time in portraying Nigma's gimmick as a mental disorder, giving the character a lot more depth than other supervillains typically had in the Silver Age. Besides the excellent portrayal of Eddie, it's also just a really fun and quirky comic. It's very humorous to see the dynamic duo all paranoid over every single odd occurrence in Gotham, wondering whether it's a riddle left by the Riddler or just a random nothing. Number 14. Knightfall. Published throughout most of 1993, this epic arc featured the writing of Chuck Dixon, Alan Grant, and Doug Monk, and the artwork of Norm Breyfogle, Jim Aparo, and Graham Nolan. In other words, a whole cadre of the greatest creators to ever work on the character of Batman. It's the legendary story of when Bane first came to Gotham, broke out all of the inmates of Arkham Asylum, and then after Batman had recaptured them all and was at the end of his ropes, Bane confronted him in combat, which of course ended with a broken bat. Stories where Batman goes through a gauntlet of his entire rogues gallery usually end up sucking because he beats them too fast and too easy. Here they pull the genius move of dragging it all out and having Batman face his enemies one at a time. Most of the rogues gets their time to shine here, and some of my favorites include Victor Zsasz, the Riddler, the Ventriloquist and Scarface, and of course the Joker and Scarecrow team up. My next video is actually a review of Knightfall, so we'll talk more about the arc very soon. Number 13. No Man's Land. Another massive epic. This one was published throughout the entire year of 1999 and featured way too many creators to even mention. If you watch my channel, you know what the premise is here. Gotham is hit by earthquake. Government declares the ruined city a no man's land. People who stayed form gangs and fight over territory to survive. I don't think I've recited a plot more than this one, and it's far from over. It will probably appear again on lists, and then I've got to review it too, of course. Anyway, so the premise of No Man's Land is just absolutely awesome. Having classic Batman characters wage gang wars in a totally ravaged Gotham City. What a genius concept. Many of the characters also had some of the greatest moments of their entire existence. Like Commissioner Gordon, for example, who's angry with Batman for abandoning the city for so long. Barbara Gordon and the Huntress are also amazing here. And of course the rogues shine really brightly in this arc as well, especially Two-Face and Scarecrow. Penguin is great too. Number 12. Red Rain. a special one-shot graphic novel released in 1991. It was written by Doug Monk and penciled by Kelly Jones. To put it simply, it's about Batman facing Dracula. The Prince of Darkness comes to Gotham to spread his nocturnal terror, creating vampire legions out of the city's hapless citizens. Now the Dark Knight has an opponent he can't possibly hope to defeat, until he allies himself with one of Dracula's oldest foes, Tanya, a vampire herself and a victim of the Dark Lord long ago, who's now turned good. In order to match Dracula, Tanya gives Batman the gift, or curse, of vampirism, turning the masked manhunter into an actual creature of the night. I love horror and I love Batman, so how can I not love this comic? Pitting Batman against Dracula, or just vampires period, is such an obvious yet great idea. Turning him into a vampire is even greater. Now we finally get to see him actually be what he always merely pretends to be, a mysterious nocturnal monster. The gothic art by Kelly Jones is also just gorgeously macabre and absolutely amazing. Number 11. Ticket to Tragedy. This obscure little tale was published in Detective Comics 481 in 1978 and features the writing of Denny O'Neil and the artwork of the equally legendary Marshall Rogers. In the story, a vengeful killer is gunning for a British surgeon, but mistakenly hits and kills his patient and best friend, a man the doctor had just saved, with a complicated heart operation. Already disillusioned by the world's cruelty and injustice, the doctor falls deeper into hopeless nihilism and vows to destroy his recent progress on a revolutionary heart transplant method. Luckily, Batman hears of this, as the doctor is actually a cousin of Alfred's, and the Dark Knight detective promises to bring the killer to justice within 3 days, if the good doctor refrains from his plan. This is a great little detective story with the inspiring message to never give up, not even when things feel hopeless. It's also one of the first Batman comics I ever read, so I do hold it very dear, and for some reason I've just always really liked it. It is in part due to the absolutely amazing art by Marshall Rogers. This is in fact his best work in my opinion. Number 10. The Killing Joke. The classic one-shot graphic novel by Alan Moore and Brian Boland, released in 1988. Joker tries to prove to Batman that all it takes to become a raving lunatic is one really bad day, and he uses Commissioner Gordon as the guinea pig. Meanwhile, we get flashbacks to Joker's possible origins as a failed comedian who tragically lost his pregnant wife in an absurd accident. You know how it all goes. One of the greatest Joker stories ever told, it's also one of the few where the Clown Prince of Crime is portrayed in a somewhat sympathetic light. Even though he's a horrible bastard, we understand him here, and why he does the things he does kinda makes sense in a way. The story is also an interesting look at the long-running rivalry between him and Batman. This is one of the first Joker stories I ever read. I think it's the second one actually, after Laughing Fish, and I remember it made me realize just how awesome the character really is. I also wish Brian Boland had drawn more Batman comics, because damn, his work is gorgeous. Number 9. The original Two-Face trilogy. The classic arc which introduced Two-Face. It was published across Detective Comics 66 and 68 in 1942 and Detective Comics 80 in 1943. The writer and artist team consisted of Batman creators Bill Finger and Bob Kane. In it, we meet Harvey Kent, yet to be renamed Dent, Gotham City's dashing district attorney and friend of Batman. After getting acid splashed over half of his face, Harvey is hideously disfigured and subsequently shunned by society, including his fiancée, Gilda. Harvey then turns to the ugly side of society, crime, and becomes Two-Face, the most bizarre public enemy the city has ever seen. A man split in the middle, between good and evil, a living Jekyll and Hyde. This trilogy features the finest writing of any Golden Age Batman comic that I've ever read. Arcs like this one were basically unheard of at the time, and so was giving the villain actual character development, which Harvey received here. It also features one of the most tragic and sympathetic portrayals of Two-Face. In short, an amazing introduction of my favorite rogue. Number 8. Only Angels Have Wings. Published in Brave and the Bold 191 in 1982, this one was written by Dan Mishkin and Gary Cohn and penciled by the brilliant Jim Aparo. It's about the Joker being framed for the murder of the Penguin on live television. The ace of knaves then contacts his hated nemesis, the Dark Knight detective, and proposes a team-up with the purpose of finding the true killer, clearing Joker's name of the deed. Batman accepts, and we then get one of the most awesome little adventures in DC Comics history. One of my favorite Joker stories ever told. I've always loved this one. It's another one that I read early on, back when I bought old Swedish reprints of Batman comics, before I had the means to acquire the original American versions. So it means a lot to me and holds plenty of nostalgic value. But even without that, how could anyone not love this comic? Batman and Joker teaming up to solve a case together, the grim masked Manhunter and the zany Harlequin of Hate partnering up? I'm there. Number 7. The original Man-Bat trilogy. The arc that introduced Man-Bat. It was published across Detective Comics 400, 402 and 407, all of them in 1970. The writer-artist team was composed of Bat legends Frank Robbins and Neil Adams. In this one we meet Dr. Kirk Langstrom, a scientist working on enhancing the human hearing capabilities. To achieve his goal, Langstrom has created a serum by taking gland extracts from bats. Of course, as all scientists do in these type of stories, Kirk tests the serum on himself, which of course, as always happens in these type of scenarios, transforms Langstrom into a monstrous creature. A monstrous bat creature, naturally. It's now up to Batman to stop this wild beast and help Kirk back into his human form so that he can reunite with his grieving fiancée, Francine. I've harped on about this one a lot, but that's because it's just so great. An eerie, tragic horror story about a well-meaning scientist who gradually loses all of his humanity as he's transformed into a hideous monster. What a fitting enemy he was for the Batman as well. A true, proper Batman. Number 6. Going Sane. A four-parter published across Legends of the Dark Knight 65 to 68 in 1994. The writer was J.M. DeMatteis and the penciler Joe Staton. My favorite Joker story of all time. This one is about the Clown Prince seemingly succeeding in killing Batman. Without his beloved arch-nemesis, the Joker has no more reason to continue his hedonistic lifestyle and therefore goes sane, disappearing into another personality. He becomes Joseph Kerr, a kind man living in an ordinary apartment with his sweet girlfriend. Of course, Batman ain't really dead, and nothing good ever lasts forever. So like I said, my favorite Joker story, it definitely features the most tragic and sympathetic portrayal of the Clown Prince of crime we've ever seen. It's a sad story about the man this insane villain could have been, and the good life he could have lived. Same goes for Batman, as he too experienced a happier existence while recuperating in a small town outside of Gotham. So both an amazing Joker story and Batman story. Number 5. Blind Justice. A three-parter published across Detective Comics 598 to 600 in 1989. It was written by Batman 89 screenwriter Sam Hamm and penciled by Dennis Cowan. It's a really dense plot about Bruce discovering shady affairs in his own company, which involves the creation of remote-controlled super soldiers called Bone Crushers. After trying to put a stop to it all, the people behind the scheme, Wayne's own employees and friends, frame him for being a Soviet spy. Yeah, it was the late 80s after all. Turns out this cartel within Wayne Enterprises has been doing some digging into Bruce's past and discovered his many bizarre travels and suspect acquaintances. Of course, all of that was part of his training to become Batman, but they don't know that. So here we have it, the first Batman comic I ever read. For a year, it was the only Batman comic I had. I got it from a friend who had bought it at a flea market, and this was before I had discovered the stores that sold old comics. So yeah, obviously it means a lot to me. But besides that, it's an amazing story, and one of the best to explore the character of Bruce Wayne. Number 4. Dark Knight, Dark City. Another three-parter, this one was published across Batman 452 to 454 in 1990. It was written by Peter Milligan and penciled by Kieron Dwyer. In it, Batman faces a new and improved Edward Nygma, who's gone totally bonkers and become a cold-blooded killer. The villain forced the Dark Knight to go through a whole parade of various bizarre and macabre situations, like dancing with corpses and slitting the throat of an infant. Obviously something ain't right with dear old Eddie, and Batman soon realized that something much grander and quite supernatural is afoot. This is one of the greatest Riddler stories ever told, and another one I talked about exactly 1 year ago. It's fascinating to see just how dark and unhinged the Riddler could be, but of course shouldn't be, at least in my opinion. It's also just a perfect Batman story, where the hero gets to use both his brawn and his brains, and is pushed to his very limits. Plus I feel plenty of nostalgia for this one too, as it's yet another of my earliest Batman comics. Number 3. The Coming of Clayface 3. a two-parter that introduced Preston Payne, the third Clayface. Written by Len Wein and penciled by Marshall Rogers, it was published across Detective Comics 478 to 479 in 1978. In the story, Batman faces a new, deranged, and powerful villain called Clayface 3, who can melt people with a mere touch. Turns out that this disturbed freak was once a deformed scientist who attempted to cure himself of his physical abnormality by using a sample of Matt Hagen's DNA, the second Clayface. The experiment failed, of course, and Preston was transformed into his current putty state. This is another horror story of a well-meaning scientist accidentally turning himself into a hideous monster, and you know how I feel about those. Payne is just such a great villain, horrific and terrifying, yet at the same time very tragic. It's also a great Batman story, as Bruce is dealing with the loss of Silver St. Cloud, his ex-girlfriend, who left him in the previous story after discovering that he's Batman. The comic explores how Batman ruins every chance of happiness for Bruce. Number 2. Year 1. The infamous 4-part arc published across Batman 404 to 407 in 1987. The writer and artist team was of course composed of Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. The story details Bruce Wayne's entire first year as Batman, parallel to Jim Gordon's arrival in the city, a police lieutenant transferred from Chicago. The two men are among the few good people left in Gotham, and separately they both fight the rampant corruption and organized crime that plagues the city, eventually leading to their iconic partnership. So this is arguably the most famous and popular Batman story of all time. Some might say it's overrated. I wouldn't, but I would say it's overexposed. It is one damn amazing comic though. Few stories manage to humanize Batman and Gordon as well as this one does. And I really love the extremely gritty noir tone of the arc. It was also among the first Bat comics I read, and I remember being shocked at all the grittiness. I also grew obsessed with it in my teens and drew many of my own comics, which were basically just cheap rip-offs of Year 1. And now for my favorite Batman story of all time. Number 1. The Eye of the Beholder. Written by Andrew Helfer and penciled by Chris Sprouse, this one was published in Batman Annual 14 in 1990. The story is a reimagining of Two-Face's origin for the post-crisis continuity. In it we meet Harvey Dent, heroic DA and ally of Batman and Captain Gordon. Little do these two know that Harvey is struggling with severe mental issues, suppressing an evil dark side which bubbles just beneath the surface of his fragile mind. After getting disfigured, this darkness is unleashed, and Dent takes on a new identity of Two-Face. Yeah, I've talked about this one many times, including in my top 5 Two-Face stories video, where I ranked it as number 1. Yes, this is the greatest Two-Face story ever told in my opinion. Out of all of his origins, this one is my favorite and feels the most believable. However, it isn't just an amazing Two-Face story, as it offers a fascinating look at Batman and Gordon as well. The idea of how far these three men are willing to go in their war on crime is explored. And of course, as we all know, it turned out that Harvey was the one willing to go the furthest. So there you have it. Those are my 20 favorite Batman stories of all time. This list certainly ain't cut in stone and might look a little different already tomorrow. I think it's impossible to make a definitive greatest Batman stories list, given the character's near 80-year-old history and massive library of comics. It's not really the same thing as, say, listing the 5 greatest Killer Croc stories. Anyway, as I usually do in these special videos, here's a few contenders that narrowly missed inclusion. The Origin of Batman. A golden age gem about Batman finally tracking down the killer of his parents, Joe Chill. The Laughing Fish, the classic 70s two-parter where Joker attempts the mad scheme of getting the copyrights on all fish. The Sound of Silence, the quirky story of obscure one-shot villain Camilla Cameo, aka the Mime, the woman who hates all sounds. The Mud Pack, a 4-parter from 1989 where all of the Clayfaces that existed at the time teamed up under the leadership of Basil Karlo. And A New Dawn, a 3-parter from 2009 where Batman forms a partnership with the King of Conundrums to track down King Tut. Needless to say, Batman has a shit ton of amazing stories. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.